The need for style. It used to be thought that only the rich and famous needed style. Television has changed all that. We can now see that there are people in our society who can earn vast sums of money, become the world's sweetheart, be photographed at airports, and be known by name to hotel proprietors without displaying talent of any kind. The phenomenon cannot be regarded as an unmixed blessing. Television is certainly to blame for contributing to the madness of young people by bombarding their consciences with the lurid spectacle of worldwide injustice. Even so, it would be futile, and worse, styleless, to attempt to limit its activities. At the very least, it should be treated like Chinese rape. As it is inevitable, we should relax and enjoy its influence upon our lives. This attitude would at least have the effect of calling the bluff of the newscasters. The spreading of shock news is not a denunciation of war and similar so-called evils. It is a way of selling television sets. It is a parallel activity with the making of pornographic films. The publicity for such movies is pseudo-puritanical, but the audience is invariably pleased to see that debauchery fills the screen for 9/10 of the film's showing time, and at the end of which retribution gets to work faster than a clip joint warned that there is going to be a raid. An even more stylish method of dealing with rape is not merely to consent, but sexually to assault the rapist. As Noel Coward has said, television is not a thing to watch, it is a thing to be on. This is what many people think, but they do not do enough about it. Like Mr. Macbeth, surely the most styleless Scotsman ever to wear kilts. What they would highly, that would they genteelly. This will not do. Any one of us, be he ever so humble, may find himself on, and woe to him if he is not prepared with his own style. He may otherwise find himself simpering and answering some impertinent interviewer's questions with when, in fact, he knows, as most of us do, that he has fascinating opinions about every subject under the sun. Some time ago, this subject was raised, but not really dealt with, in a program called The Snooper Society, a documentary feature in which the legality of the invasion of privacy was questioned. The inquiry was divided into 3 parts. The first of these displayed an assortment of tiny gadgets by means of which information about our lives can be extracted from us whether we like it or not. Apparently, not only our telephones, but our entire homes can be tapped. Utterances made in a normal speaking voice as we wander about the house can be recorded and transcribed in another part of the jungle. The second section of the program dealt with those personal details about ourselves that we lay before strangers of our own volition. We were shown several private citizens pausing in the street to answer questions about their incomes, their operations, and their sex lives. Here it seemed to me that the interviewer spoke from faintly curled lips. In a way, this was encouraging. It was an indication that his lifestyle is at last emerging. At the moment, he very likely thinks of himself as an interviewer and regards self-effacement as part of his function. I prophesy that this notion will pass, and that soon, like Mr. Muggeridge and others, he will come to treat his subjects as common clay from which to mold a series of busts of himself. What was regrettable about his implied comment, if such it was that by it he aligned himself with those who regard indiscretion as a weakness. Surely the people who tell all, and worse than all, are the saints of census. Finally, several famous people were asked, whether or not they thought the government should be allowed to gather and hoard material for secret files on its victims. One of the celebrities to whom this question was put was an actress, and even she thought that measures should be taken to restrict the authorities. I was deeply sorry to hear her express these views. I like to think of the acting profession as one long, lucrative indiscretion. Yet she was not alone in holding this repressive opinion. Mr. Richard Burton and Miss Elizabeth Taylor, who are so great that both of them brought style even to marriage, once complained openly that the newsmen in Italy seemed likely at any moment to photograph one or the other of them in the bathroom. The way to deal with this problem, if it is one, is not to build a higher and higher wall around the house, but to urinate with style. If machines come into existence which can collect and tabulate all the relevant facts about everyone in Britain and America, and cram them all into a space the size of a telephone book, it will be done. And what is more, when information has been gathered, it will be used. What else has it been gathered for? By 1984, there will be a government and lidless eye gazing down at the occupant of every room in every city in our part of the world. This prospect causes some people to feel positively suicidal. Why? At present, many of us spend hours of every evening waltzing round the town without, to our chagrin, causing the slightest stir. When fatigue prevents us from staying out a moment longer, we return home, rip off our eyelashes, and embrace defeat. In a few years' time, however, our anguish will be over. Even at home we shall feel we are worth watching. Margaret or Jimmy will care. Do I tell my readers that that's Margaret Thatcher or Jimmy Carter? Will they know? I hope they will. Already, of course, we are being affected by television in the conduct of our daily lives without fully realizing it. 10 years ago, a housewife, interrupted in her shopping by a reporter and asked what she thought of the common market, would have clapped her hand to her lips, giggled a little, and mumbled that she supposed it was all right. Today it is to be hoped that the same woman in the same situation would spot the camera in a second, smile graciously at it, and drawing a deep but covert breath would begin, while on the one hand, certain superficial historians might say, in this respect the influence of television is entirely good, but we must do more than think of it as an enemy against whose intermittent stares we must brace ourselves. We must welcome its interest and rise joyfully to its challenge by taking our lifestyle with us wherever we go. It provides us with the ideal means of swatting up our stagecraft. Many confrontations and interviews are stored up for showing at a later date, possibly at several later dates, and this enables us to see ourselves not mercifully as others see us, which is always worse than we really are, but as the camera sees us, which may be a more nearly unbiased view. Thus we have an advantage that was once available only to movie actors who every evening see the rushes of their day's work, so that errors can be observed and corrected. Politicians are already acutely aware that it is far more important to look well on television than to understand world affairs. Mr. Richard Nixon cannot help knowing that the reason he had to wait so many long dark years before ascending the throne of America was that he allowed himself to be co-starred with his opponent on television. At that moment, whether or not his policies were sound became unimportant. He lost the battle because he lacked the power to project sincerity, which Mr. John F. Kennedy, like Dr. Billy Graham and Miss Lena Horne, possessed in such abundance. Soon there will be very few professions that are not also the profession of acting. Bishops will bless only that section of their congregation that is kneeling under the cameras. Surgeons will remove only those organs of the body that viewers can recognize. It is the fate of ideas that once seemed contradictory that they shall one day merge in opposition to some new concept. Mr. Galileo held that the earth moved around the sun. The Inquisition said that the sun moved around the earth. They agreed on only one point, that these two notions were mutually exclusive. But today, an astronomer would probably say that the two planets continually altered their relative positions. Once upon a time, the dross of everyday existence was considered quite unsuitable material for drama. Life was accidental, repetitious, unedifying. Tragedies were the opposite, formal, articulate, and shot through with moral purpose. In spite of the apparent distance between these two planets, they were secretly set on a collision course from the beginning of time. This first became noticeable in the work of Mr. Anton Chekhov. We forgive him because he could not have foreseen the disastrous consequences of his action, but he was one of the earliest playwrights drastically to bend the trajectory of art toward life. Since then, things have worsened so rapidly that in recent years we have come to regard his plays, which were criticized originally for being hardly plays at all, as being too theatrical. Now the situation is so bad that we can plot the point where the drama and the documentary will crash. It will happen on television. In fact, it is happening in America already in the television art form called docudrama. When the disaster occurs, we must decide quite definitely from which vehicle we will drag the victims. Not everyone is of the same mind about this. In The Guardian, the drama critic Mr. Alan Brien described the effect on his private life produced by appearing in a weekly television program. At first he thought he was gradually bringing to his public image the naturalness of everyday speech. Later he realized that what had happened was the reverse. The formal phrases used by long-term televisionaries were seeping into his conversation with his friends. The article is written with charming self-deprecation, but the sentiments expressed therein are nonetheless very worrying. It seems that Mr. Brien prefers the haphazard to the formal, that he is in the ludicrous position of being prepared to take the smooth with the rough. Mr. Kenneth Loach, the television and film director, is even more determined to bring some kind of chaos out of order. He is on record as having said that he wants television plays to look like the news. What a poor wingless creature he must be! Why does he not want the news to be as well acted as a play? This, whether they merely watch the news or take part in it, it is the dearest wish of all stylists. We have seen that television greatly increases the need for style. Other aspects of our age, however, make an individual style increasingly difficult to attain. Indeed, to say that is not enough. Our enemy is not so much any one particular period of history as time itself. The arrow of time points always in the direction of diminishing difference. This was Dr. Jacob Bronowski's first law. Style stands facing the other way. This is mine. Perhaps time takes an unexpected lurch forward with every major war. It was after the Second World War that I saw the seemingly everlasting walls that were the divisions between countries bulldozed into the dust. There appeared to be three main reasons why these had to go. In the first place, news began to travel so far, so fast, and so incessantly that abroad lost its threatening mystery. In England, the aesthetes and the intellectuals had always suffered from a fatuous Francomania, but in 1946, real people started crossing the Channel. Change is ignored by the old, resented by the middle-aged, and welcomed by the young. It was, therefore, chiefly teenagers who now began to flow over the French landscape, like the waters of the Frege Dam. They were just about as well received. English campers were shot at by French farmers. Tourists in Spain were flung into jail. Increased foreign travel did not bring world peace. All that happened was that, in juxtaposition, the friction between two national styles wore down the finer points of each. The second force at work to make foreign travel fashionable was the fact that, apart from having the desire for it, the young now also had the money. They became our nouveaux riches, and accordingly were accused by both the traditionally rich and the habitually poor of spending their newly acquired wealth foolishly and with ostentation. Just how this startling financial revolution came about, I never discovered. I can only tearfully report as evidence that it did in fact that, when I was a student at Battersea Polytechnic, it took 4 of us a whole term of cheating, wheedling, saving, and borrowing to consummate an excursion to Box Hill, a beauty spot not 50 miles from London. When all classes and all nationalities become one big, unhappy family, there remained only one broad distinction to go. This was the difference between the sexes. In the past few years, even that has been obliterated. To many English people, this was the most unsettling social change of all. The craze for boyishness, which broke out among the flappers of the 20s, were but a superficial vicissitude in women's fashion. Only prim vicars and stuffy uncles in Punch took it seriously. It in no way foreshadowed the epicene being whom we now see everywhere. A little surprisingly, not all fashion experts are in favor of this. One, at least, says he will reintroduce the codpiece in an effort to design trousers that the wife simply cannot wear. The English of even 30 years ago were full of preconceptions about sex, nearly all of which have turned out to be false. Men were assumed to have inherited certain character traits along with their testicles. They were thought to be strong, sexy, and brave, almost by nature. We now see that these attributes were not innate, but forced upon them by circumstances, chiefly economic. Before the machines took over, many men could earn a living only by physical labor. If they wished to show that they could support a wife, they must be seen to be strong. Now a man needs only enough strength to press a switch. Muscles are for adornment only. On the other hand, a woman who wished to become a wife had once to make a great mystery of the rituals of domesticity. But now, as the newspapers put it, marriage is dead. It can at last be freely admitted that a man has no more difficulty than his girlfriend in opening a tin. When Mr. Spencer Tracy asked Miss Katharine Hepburn what she noticed first about a person, she replied, "Whether it's a man or a woman." She must really be worried now. And we should worry too. The various social changes that I have just described have, during the past 15 years, brought into being that classless, stateless, all-purpose human unit that now wanders up and down King's Road or any similar street in any of the big cities of the world. This being has been deprived of all the smaller group styles on which he could have begun to build an individual style. To start from the ground up, without help, seems too arduous a task. He finds it easier to identify merely with the fact of being young, and has more in common with the teenagers of Tokyo than with an elder brother. On this idea he leans with all his waning might, but it is too large a concept to build upon. It is rather a dream in which to flounder. The only strength it offers is numerical strength. There is danger in numbers. In no sense can any of the pop festivals be reasonably regarded as a success, even by those who were there. Only a statistician can be exhilarated by the togetherness of 300,000 people. All an ordinary mortal can do is enjoy the company of the people on his right and left and count the naughts in tomorrow's press reports. As for the music, in pouring rain he will hear it gushing from amplifiers which he cannot control, instead of listening to it in comfort on his record player at home. To the rest of us, descriptions of all such events read like news of a hurricane. A few people die, others are rushed to the hospital, total disaster is averted only by flocks of helicopters, herds of ambulances, and regiments of nuns riding to the rescue. To smile benignly on those few occasions when no one is actually murdered is like visiting a mental hospital and expressing delight at the all-pervading calm, without realizing that the inmates are all drowsy with luminol. At White Lake, the site of the first great rock concert, marijuana was sold like ice cream or popcorn. In any case, what a standard to set for an evening's entertainment! It is as though, asked about a performance of Aida, one were to reply, "It was marvelous. I got away without a scratch." The young have become like these primitive tribes whose oneness is such that their members can communicate with one another without speech, and if necessary, across hundreds of miles of desert. The faces of explorers blossom into seraphic smiles as they tell us of this phenomenon. But it remains a state of being from which most races have moved away by whatever means they could. In some very remote regions of the world, the inhabitants resort to finding some such object as a piece of rock, learning its peculiar markings, and then hiding it where no one else will be able to find it. Only thus can they maintain the idea of their individuality, and prevent their thoughts from continually sliding back into the tribal consciousness. Perhaps it was for the same purpose that more sophisticated peoples adopted the custom of marriage. After all, what until recently was a woman but a curiously shaped object whose characteristics a man memorized before shutting her in a Georgian-fronted cave? Now that women no longer gladly submit to this treatment, even stranger devices are being employed by certain people to combat the monotony of standardization. Recently, men have started whizzing round the world in boats the size of teacups. Unfortunately, the very success of this maneuver has defeated its aim. Almost at once it has become difficult to avoid the rush hour going round Cape Horn. However far-fetched some of these antics may appear, and whether they succeed or fail, they deserve praise. They are some individual's endeavor to project his style onto the whole world. They involve his entire being, and they use up energies that might otherwise become destructive. Those who, on the other hand, allow themselves reluctantly to sink into the faceless limbo toward which time is always drawing us, either take drugs or pool their resentment with that of other people in the same predicament until they have accumulated vast stockpiles of hatred. What can be done? We can either legalize cannabis, perhaps distributing it as part of welfare payments, or we can teach the young how to cultivate a lifestyle by means less expensive than global sailing. And what about the opposing team, huddling together in their fear of the young? Could not they, too, be armed with a lifestyle?